I wasn't born poor. I was made poor. By silence, by omission, by a family who looked at me and saw nothing they wanted to claim. My name is Elara, and in the eyes of my father's new family, I was simply the leftover, a relic of his past life. My mother died when I was 11. I remember her soft hands, her sharp wit, and the way she used to kiss my forehead like I was the center of the universe. Then 1 year later, she was gone, and so was that universe. Dad remarried less than 8 months later. Her name was Miranda. She wore silk like second skin, sprayed perfume like armor, and treated me like a charity case she hadn't signed up for. Every smile she gave me was tight. Every conversation ended with, "Go do your homework, sweetheart. The adults are talking." And Dad, he went from calling me his bright girl to simply nodding in my direction when Miranda was around. Then came the parties, the birthdays, the barbecues, the reunions. I wasn't uninvited. No, I was never invited in the first place. I remember the first one. It was a summer garden party for my stepsister Rachel's 13th birthday. Balloons, white tents, a hired string quartet, everyone in linen and pearls. I heard about it from the neighbor's daughter, not my father. I stood on the edge of the fence that day, watching them all laugh, clink glasses, and smile like they were a picture-perfect family. My name didn't come up once. No one asked where Elara was, because Elara wasn't supposed to be part of the image they were painting. I left home at 17, no fight, no slammed doors, just a note on the kitchen counter and a key placed quietly by the coffee machine. "Thanks for the roof. I'll figure out the rest." I worked, double shifts, barista in the mornings, bookstore clerk in the afternoons, delivery runner on weekends. My clothes smelled like roasted beans and cardboard, but I paid rent, I ate, I survived. No one from that family called. At 21, I saw them again. It was by accident. I had just finished a late shift, walking back from a delivery drop near the harbor, and there they were, all of them, outside a new seafood restaurant, dressed in champagne tones. Rachel, my stepsister, was laughing beside a man in a suit, her fiancé. I'd later learn Dad had his arm around Miranda. They were taking group photos, the kind that end up in frames on fireplace mantels. I stood across the street, in a raincoat 2 sizes too big, holding a soggy takeout receipt. My father glanced up, our eyes locked, and then he looked away. Not a wave, not a nod, just a blink, and I was erased again. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst came 2 months later, when I overheard something that burned itself into my bones. I was serving drinks at a downtown gala, a charity event hosted by some high-end firm, the kind where champagne is bottomless and laughter is shallow. And then I heard her voice. "Miranda." I turned, and there she was. Same pearl earrings, same condescending tone. She was laughing with 2 women near the balcony, and she said clear as crystal, "Oh, Elara, she's probably wiping tables somewhere. Sweet girl, but not really built for our world. You know." The 2 women chuckled. One even said, "Well, every family has its story. I didn't drop the tray. I didn't even flinch. I just walked away, into the bathroom, locked the stall, sat down, and let silence scream inside me." I never told anyone what that moment did to me. But something shifted that night, a cold kind of fire, a vow with no words. If I don't belong in their world, I'll build one where they have to knock to enter. I didn't want revenge, not the petty kind. I wanted something better. I wanted power. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that waits. From that night on, I became invisible and focused. I started working for a woman named Lydia, a logistics manager who ran operations for high-end restaurants. She took a liking to me, said I reminded her of herself at my age, sharp, hungry, observant. She taught me spreadsheets, shipping cycles, real estate leasing strategies. She let me shadow her for 6 months. Then she connected me to her cousin, an investor in the startup space. I pitched him an idea. A courier app for high-end boutique vendors who needed fast, private, same-day delivery. He said no, but I kept tweaking, and I came back. The 3rd time, he said yes. At 23, I became co-founder of VeraTrack. I wasn't rich, but I was no longer invisible. I never went back to their parties because I wasn't invited, and I didn't need to be, not anymore, because someday I'd make sure they'd walk into a building with my name on it, and that day would not come with an invitation. It would come with a surprise. 3 years passed. 3 years of building in silence, of working while the world slept, of smiling at clients who thought I was just the assistant, of learning how power moves not in noise, but in ownership. Veratrack was growing. By 26, we had 3 major contracts in the state. Our team expanded to 16. I moved into a modest loft, nothing flashy, but it had high ceilings, and the sun hit the corner of my desk like a spotlight every morning. Still, no one from my family knew. That wasn't bitterness, it was strategy. You see, when people don't believe in you, you stop handing them updates. You start handing them silence. One morning, while scanning real estate options for our expansion office, I got a message from Rachel. Yes, that Rachel. My stepsister. The girl who once told me my thrift store shoes made her itch. The message was short, too polite to be sincere. Hey, hope you're well. We're planning a family celebration for Grandpa's 80th. It's kind of a legacy thing, just close family. Thought I'd pass it along in case you're in town. No pressure. No pressure, she might as well have said. Don't come, this wasn't really meant for you anyway. But something about that message, it hit different. Not because of what it said, but how late it came. The event was that weekend, sent on a Thursday, practically a formality. They just didn't want me showing up uninvited and making them look bad. I replied with a single word, noted. And that was it. But inside, a storm brewed, because I knew what that party really was. It wasn't about Grandpa, it was about them. Their curated image, their perfect dynasty. I wasn't poor anymore, but I was still beneath them, in their minds. Still that barista girl, still that server holding a tray. And no matter what I had built, they never asked, never wondered. Saturday came. I told myself I wouldn't care. I told myself I'd work through it. But curiosity has a way of crawling under the door, even when you lock it tight. So I checked the location. It was being held at Elara Heights, a private rooftop venue atop a luxury apartment building downtown. I knew the place. Our startup had once pitched a service to the restaurant on the lower floor. They had said no. Funny how circles close. At 8 p.m. sharp, I put on a coat, not a dress, not heels, just a long black coat and clean white sneakers. I wasn't there to impress. I was there to see. From across the street, I watched them arrive. Town cars, designer bags, laughter that echoed louder than the music. Rachel stepped out in a silver gown like she was walking a red carpet. Dad held Miranda's coat like some loyal assistant. My last name didn't look good on them, but they wore it anyway like borrowed prestige. I crossed the street, not to enter, just to glance at the guest list posted discreetly at the entrance. My name wasn't there, of course not. I didn't need it to be. The hostess barely looked at me, which was perfect. I walked past, up a floor, into the elevator, and then back down. I wanted them to know I could be there. That access was never the issue. It was recognition they'd never offer me. Back on the sidewalk, I stood beneath the glow of the venue's upper windows. I could see silhouettes moving behind the glass, people who shared my blood, people who had deleted me, so politely, so surgically. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, took a photo of the building, and whispered to myself, one day, I'll own the next rooftop they party on, and they won't even know until I hand them the bill. But that night wasn't about revenge, it was about confirmation. That no matter how much I achieved, they'd always reduce me to where I came from, not where I stood. And maybe that was the gift, the motivation, because pity fades, but fury builds. A few weeks later, I returned to work with a sharper mind. I pitched a bold plan: expand operations into downtown real estate, acquisition included. My co-founder was hesitant, but I was clear. We're not just a service anymore. We're infrastructure. We need a central hub, a flagship. I found a listing. An old 5-story structure with steel bones and forgotten history, a place no one wanted. But I saw something, not just a building. A stage, we bought it, renovated floor by floor, turned the rooftop into a sleek glass pavilion. It had potential, and a view of every skyscraper they thought I'd never reach. By the end of the year, I had signed the lease to 2 commercial tenants, installed our HQ on the second floor, and renamed the building Verity. It means truth, because that's what I'd built mine on. I still hadn't spoken to my family, not because I was holding a grudge, but because some conversations are best had without words. And when the next invite came, I'd be the one sending it. Only, it wouldn't be a card. It would be a contract, a reservation, a reveal. And oh, I already knew what I'd say when they arrived. Welcome to the building. Mine. The building took 11 months to transform. It started with dust, rotting pipes, flickering lights, a leaky roof that coughed every time it rained. But I didn't flinch, because I wasn't building for today. I was building for a moment they'd never see coming. We stripped the structure to its bones, steel ribs, brick arteries, every inch of it, reborn. I didn't want a skyscraper. I wanted history. I wanted something real like me. Not polished, not sterile, but solid. Unbreakable. By the 4th month, we installed floor-to-ceiling windows on the top floor. The city skyline stared back like an old rival, and I smiled, because now I was taller. The rooftop was the crown jewel. A clean, open space of glass, stone, and silence. No chandeliers, no gold, just clarity. I stood there one night at 2 a.m., alone, the wind pulling at my coat, and I whispered, "This is where it ends and begins." Because what's revenge, if not a full circle? Walked quietly. I named it the Verity Pavilion, and let the silence do the talking. No press release, no announcements, just bookings, exclusive, invitation only, managed through a shell company I created months prior, because I didn't need them to know I was the owner. I needed them to think I was still no one. Then came the timing, a perfect accident. Grandpa was turning 85, bigger than the 80th. This time, a legacy dinner. All descendants of the first Whitmore line are invited. Formal dress. Venue to be announced. I knew they'd scramble for something grand. Rachel's fiancé had just lost his job. Miranda was trying to get into a social club. They needed status, they needed glamour, and most importantly, they needed a venue. I had a contact leak word through an event coordinator downtown. A brand new rooftop just opened. Discreet? Luxe? Untouched, but very selective. It worked like bait in water. 3 days later, my shell company received an inquiry availability for a 60-person formal dinner. Budget flexible. Host Rachel Whitmore. I almost laughed. Almost. But instead, I drafted the proposal personally. Professional tone, elegant font, no signature. I offered them a discounted rate 20% below market. Why? Because generosity makes the trap more beautiful. They accepted. I watched the contract arrive, signed, stamped, and then paid in full. The Whitmores had just paid me to walk onto the very rooftop I built for this moment. Irony doesn't knock. It waltzes in wearing pearls. I told my staff to treat them like royalty. Full catering, live classical quartet, custom lighting, white orchids, vintage champagne. Every detail. Perfect. Because when you orchestrate revenge this quietly, perfection is the weapon. The night before the event, I visited the pavilion. It was quiet. Moonlight draped over the marble floors like silk. The city buzzed below, unaware. I stood at the center and imagined them there, Rachel posing, Miranda giving orders, Dad laughing too loud to hide his nerves, and then me, not at the edge, not behind the curtain, but above them all. I left one thing on the premises, a small plaque. Tucked subtly beside the elevator on the ground floor, it read, "The Verity Building owner Elara Whitmore Holdings, LLC, no lights, no arrows, just truth, quiet and waiting." The day of the party arrived. I dressed like a guest, black silk, slick hair, heels that didn't whisper, they clicked. I walked in through the front. No one stopped me. No one recognized me. Not even Rachel, who brushed past with a clipboard and said, "Make sure the champagne is chilled. We're serving at 8. She thought I was staff, and that was perfect. I stood near the bar, watched them arrive, laughter, cameras, kisses on both cheeks. Dad adjusted his tie every 10 seconds. Miranda floated like she owned the sky. They didn't look for me. Of course they didn't. Why would they look for a shadow they buried years ago? At 8:30, they gave toasts, polite applause. Grandpa beamed like a child. Rachel tapped her glass. To the Whitmore legacy, she said. May it rise forever. I almost choked on my drink. Then I saw my moment. I stepped forward. No mic, just voice. But it carried. A toast. I said, if I may. Silence. Heads turned. Brows furrowed. Miranda's face collapsed in slow motion. Dad blinked. Rachel narrowed her eyes like she was reading a bad headline. To the legacy, I said, that forgot one of its own. And to this building, this rooftop, this air you're breathing, all of it, mine. Gasps. Real, cinematic gasps. I let the silence hang. Let the truth press into their chests like gravity. You weren't tricked. You weren't pranked. You were simply invited by me. Rachel stumbled back. Miranda's hand trembled. And Dad, he didn't speak. He just sat down, the way men do when they realize the daughter they buried has risen. As the ground beneath them, I didn't stay for dessert. Didn't need to. As I left, I passed the small plaque by the elevator. One of them would see it, eventually, and that would be enough. Because this wasn't vengeance. This was architecture. And every stone whispered my name. They say revenge is sweet, but no one tells you how silent it can be. I left the rooftop quietly. No mic drop, no raised voice, just a click of my heels against stone, and the soft echo of stunned silence behind me. It was better than applause. As I descended the elevator, my reflection caught on the mirrored walls. Same face, same eyes. But something had changed. I wasn't the forgotten girl anymore. I was the architect of their discomfort. And they would remember this night not because I begged to be seen, but because I made them look. Outside, the wind was gentle. I stepped into a waiting car. My driver, Malik, had been with me since the second year of Track. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Everything goes smoothly. Miss W, I smiled faintly. Better than smooth. Malik? It was quiet. He nodded. No questions. That's why I trusted him. Back in my loft, I didn't pour champagne. I didn't celebrate. I sat by the window with a notebook in my lap and wrote only one line: the greatest power is presence without permission. The fallout came quietly, like rain on a tin roof. 2 days later, my assistant forwarded me a voicemail left on our event line. It was Miranda. Her voice, usually precise and sweetened with false charm, was brittle. Hello. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. If someone from your ownership team could call me back. We'd just like to confirm who we booked through. I think there's some confusion. Confusion? There was no confusion. Just clarity. And the unbearable sting of being outplayed. Later that week, Rachel emailed the pavilion directly. No greeting. No signature. Just 3 words. Was it you? I didn't respond. Why would I? Answers are for those who ask earlier. Not after the wine is spilled and the music stopped. I focused on work. We launched our new vendor portal. Expanded into a 4th city. Signed a distribution contract with a national chain. But the buzz didn't stop. People began whispering about the Whitmore rooftop moment. It became a quiet legend in our circle how a daughter erased from the family tree rewrote her name in stone. 2 weeks later, my father called. I didn't even know he still had my number. I let it ring, then picked up. Elara, he said. Silence. His voice was older than I remembered. I didn't know. About the building. About you. I didn't respond. Let the silence thicken. It's impressive. What you've done. Still. I said nothing. I suppose I owe you an apology. That's when I spoke. You owe me nothing. He breathed. Still. I should have reached out sooner, but you didn't. I didn't know how to, he admitted. You knew how to forget me? That seemed effortless. Another pause. You sound different. I am. And then I hung up. Because closure isn't always about hugs and tears. Sometimes it's just ending the call. A few days later, a delivery arrived at my office. No note, just a box. Inside, an old photo of me as a child, maybe 6 or 7, on my mother's lap, worn at the edges, a time I barely remembered. And behind it, a check, $100,000, from the Whitmore Family Trust. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a payoff, a desperate attempt to buy silence, or maybe forgiveness. I shredded the check, framed the photo. Some things are worth keeping, others meant to burn. And then came the interview request. A journalist from an independent business magazine had heard whispers. He asked if I'd speak off the record about building a business from nothing. I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe. He asked me how it all started. I didn't mention them, not once. I told him about Lydia, about Vera Track, about working 3 jobs, about falling asleep on buses with spreadsheets in my lap. At the end, he smiled. What drives you? Elara. I looked out the window. The city glimmered. My rooftop towered quietly above the noise. Not revenge, I said. Remembrance. Of what? Of who I was, before they tried to erase me. The article came out 3 weeks later. It didn't name them. It didn't have to. Everyone who needed to read between the lines did. I got emails from old classmates, people who remembered me in thrift clothes and secondhand shoes. They weren't pitying me now. They were asking for advice. But the best moment, it came when I received a call from a young woman named Ava. She was the daughter of a caterer I used to work for. Said she had an idea for a startup delivery focused, like ours. She asked if I'd mentor her. I said yes. Not because I saw myself in her, but because I saw a future where no girl like us ever had to wait for a seat at the table. The past didn't vanish. It still showed up sometimes in dreams, sometimes in awkward dinner conversations, but it no longer hurt, because I had taken the one thing they withheld belonging and built it into a rooftop with my name carved in steel. They once said I was too poor to be part of the family. Now, they danced on the floor I designed, under lights I paid for, sipping wine I selected, and I didn't need to scream or demand acknowledgement. I just had to open the door and let them walk into the truth. Weeks passed. The party faded into whispers. The plaque by the elevator stood still, untouched, undeniable. People moved on, but not them. One by one, they reached out. A cousin messaged me on LinkedIn. Didn't know you were killing it in business? Super impressive, I left it unread. An aunt sent a voice note, sweetheart. We always knew you were special. Things just got complicated after your mom passed. You know how it is. Yes, I did know how it was. That's why I didn't reply. And then Rachel tried again. This time, it wasn't businesslike. It was raw. Look, we were wrong. I was wrong. We never gave you a chance. But maybe we could talk as sisters. Sisters, that word tasted foreign, like a lie I'd swallowed too many times before. But something inside me didn't burn. Not this time. It settled. Because when you've already climbed the mountain, you don't waste energy screaming at the rocks that once tripped you. Instead, I did something unexpected. I invited them, yes, all of them. Not to a party, not to a gala, to a dedication. Veratrack was launching a scholarship fund for girls from underserved backgrounds, girls like me who'd worked while studying, who'd juggled bills and books and broken dreams. I named it the Verity Foundation. We held the opening in the rooftop pavilion. Press was invited, partners, investors, and my family. They showed up. Of course they did. A chance to be photographed beside success. They'd never say no, but they didn't know the full story. Not until they sat down, and I stood up. I wore white. Not for purity, but for presence. No logos, no labels, just elegance. Undeniable, unapologetic. I stepped to the podium, smiled, and began. This building wasn't always glass and light. It used to be dust, forgotten, overlooked. I let the silence breathe, kind of like me. A few faces froze. But dust is just potential waiting for motion, and I moved. I saw Miranda shift in her seat. The Verity Foundation is for girls who were never picked, never praised, never chosen, but still rose. Then I paused, let every eye fall on me. To those in this room who remember a version of me that wasn't enough, thank you. Because your silence carved the shape of my voice. Your absence built the foundation beneath my feet. And your judgment taught me to trust my own reflection. I looked straight at my father. His eyes shimmered. So no, this isn't a comeback, it's a homecoming. Applause, real, heavy, earned. The media called it inspiring. The headline said, "Founder turns pain into platform for rising women." But for me, it was just peace. After the ceremony, my father approached me, alone. No Miranda. You made something beautiful, he said. Ah, thank you. He hesitated, then placed something in my hand. A ring. My mother's. Simple. Silver. Elegant. She would have been proud, he said. I nodded, and in that moment I forgave him. Not because he asked, but because I didn't need to carry him anymore. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about freedom, and I was already free. Rachel tried to hug me, I let her. She cried into my shoulder. I didn't cry back, but I didn't pull away either. Some bridges aren't rebuilt, they're just left standing, in case someone decides to walk differently next time. The night ended without drama. No raised voices, no confessions. Just me, standing on the rooftop of a building that had once been a blueprint. Now it was real. Steel and vision, stone and spite, grace and fire, all of it mine. I looked at the city. So many lights, so many stories. Some were still waiting to be told, some still fighting to be heard. And that's when I knew I wasn't finished. Because revenge isn't the destination, it's the fuel. I founded a new branch of the foundation, one focused on mentorship. Girls wrote letters, told their truths, sent photos from jobs they never thought they'd land. And one day, a girl named Naomi wrote, "They told me I wasn't smart enough. I taped your quote above my bed. The greatest power is presence without permission." I got into MIT. I cried. That was the first time I cried in years. Not because of pain, but because my story became a staircase for someone else to rise. I no longer needed to be part of their family, because I had built something better. A legacy. Not made of blood, but of choice, of strength, of silent power. So if you ask me now, were you ever invited? I'll smile and say I wasn't waiting for a seat. I built the whole damn room.